A rash of horrifying school shootings this year has set up a wave of activism calling for tougher gun control measures. From the National March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. in March to large rallies at the Minnesota State Capitol, gun control advocates have been promising their voices will be heard not only at these demonstrations but at the polls in November. But at the Minnesota legislature, a series of proposals to toughen Minnesota gun control laws died in committees. One reason groups like the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus made sure their voices were heard. In the past, we've had representatives of gun control advocacy groups on this show, and right now we are welcoming Rob Doar, who is the political director of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. Thank you so much, Rob, for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me, Esme.
All right, let me just ask you right off the bat, a recent Star Tribune Minnesota poll, we've got a graphic for it, asked, do you support or oppose a mandatory criminal background check on all gun sales, including those sold privately and at gun shows? 90% of poll respondents said they support that, with only 8% opposed. Yet, even that expanding the background checks to those private sales didn't fly in the legislature. Why not?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is when you look at the wording of the question of the poll, it certainly elicits a stopping criminals from buying firearms, which usually has broad support. But all of the bills that have been introduced at the legislature go well beyond just firearms sales. They include transfers, loans, gifts, loans between hunting parties. There's a much broader scope, and usually it's also tied in with other legislation. So typically, when you get into the actual minutia of bills, you see support start to drop off dramatically.
All right. And that's why you think that even that expansion to private sales, which would include transfers or transfers of hunting rifles, that you think that's why that went nowhere? I
do. It went well beyond just sales. And also, there's other states that have had similar polling results. Maine, for example, they actually tried a ballot measure to enact universal background checks, and it failed with 52% opposed. Nevada, it passed with just over 50%. And so we have seen universal background checks beyond the ballot, and even though polling said it was 90%, it's usually much closer to 50-50.
What are you hearing about what Minnesotans want when it comes to gun control?
Well, what we are really interested in is making sure that people who shouldn't have firearms don't get firearms, and that's something that we can all come to agreement on. And we've worked with both sides of the aisle in the past to make sure that we're actually targeting criminals who are using firearms, not just law-abiding gun owners in mass. And I think that there's a lot of work that can be done along those lines, making sure that we're going after criminals and not law-abiding gun owners.
Okay. How about the issue of mental health? Because that seems to be sort of the elephant in the room here.
Right.
What about the issue of mental health? Because there were some measures that struggled to try and approach that at the Capitol, and they, of course, went nowhere. Yeah,
and that's something that we're always interested in. We've worked with organizations that focus on mental health, trying to target gun shops and messaging there, seeing how we could help intercede. In Minnesota, 78% of our firearm deaths are suicides. So the strategies to address suicides are vastly different than the strategies to address violent crime. And I think, usually they're rural white men, farmers in greater Minnesota. And I think we need to really take a comprehensive look at how can we make sure that everybody has access to mental health, but also provide the resources to families in order to help them intercede with a loved one who they think is at risk.
I know you feel that there are a lot of misconceptions about your side of this argument. What are some of the biggest ones? I think people, think that we're in the, in the pocket of the gun industry or something like that. All of our funding comes from pro-Second Amendment activists. I think there's just a misunderstanding that we have a vested interest in seeing the propagation of firearms, and really our vested interest is making sure that Minnesotans' Second Amendment rights are respected. Do you feel Minnesota's laws are tough enough?
Minnesota, we are third lowest in the nation in homicide rate. Our violent crime rate has dropped 50% over the last 25 years. We've got our permit to carries have exploded in those times. We're 300,000 permit to carry holders.
And do you think it's the expansion of permit to carry that's resulted in this drop in crime?
I don't necessarily subscribe that correlation equals causation, but certainly it's evident that more firearms in the hands of law-abiding citizens doesn't correlate to increased crime.
Okay. Well, Rob Doar Doar, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And Mr. Doar has graciously agreed to continue this conversation on Facebook Live on the WCCO Facebook page at 11 a.m. immediately after the end of the show. So like WCCO TV on Facebook, then you can join us live at 11 a.m. or even watch that video later. So Rob Doar, the political director of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, we'll see you in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.